This is a video for people considering applying for the Royal Society of Edinburgh Enterprise Fellowship Programme. My name is Dr. Kevin Parker and my company is called KKI Associates. Together with my colleague, Dr. Tony Aldous, we have been operating in the area of startups, spin-out companies for approximately 25 years, and we've probably carried out something like 500 assignments over that time. In particular, we've been working with the Royal Society of Edinburgh for the last 8 or 9 years, doing application workshops to help people produce better applications for the Royal Society of Edinburgh Enterprise Fellowship Scheme. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tony Aldous. I'm an associate of Kevin's. I've been working with him for about 25 years now, and we've covered a whole range of different technology projects across a whole different range of industries over that time. So we're pretty confident that we've seen most of the questions that you'll be wanting to address in putting your application together for the RSE.
When you look at the enterprise application questions, there is an online questionnaire. You'll see that there's a number of sections. There's a section purely to do with administration, which we're not covering. Then there are other sections to do with people issues, market and technology issues, intellectual property issues, and funding issues. In this workshop, we're covering people issues, questions about people and the team. There are a number of questions, mostly, but not exclusively, in section B of the application form, which relate to you and your team. One of the most important ones is, why are you the right person to do this? And do you have a career history that justifies this? Another important question is, what is your team? What are your partnerships and what are your connections? And we're going to be talking about some of those things as we go through this video. Now, here's an interesting slide. This isn't from the Royal Society of Edinburgh. This is from the Welsh Council for Voluntary Action. And we like this slide because in a summation, it tells you very neatly what it is that funders want to know. When you're asking people for money, they'll usually ask these kind of questions. Who are you? Do you have a track record? What's the problem you're trying to address? What's the best solution? You should have a look at this slide and make sure that you have covered all of these things in your application form. In particular, the questions that I've ringed here, which are, who are you? Do you have a track record? And do you have skills and capacity to keep your project and finances on course? So we're going to talk about finding partners and building teams. What is it that we have to do to satisfy these questions? What will we have to do should we actually be successful in achieving the Enterprise Fellowship? So many business writers, academic sports coaches are very interested in the way that people work together in teams. They recognize the power of the team is far more than the sum of the individuals involved. But I'm going to start off with a few important points for you to consider and address in your application. So you need to build a team, and I put team in inverted commas because it's not just the people that will immediately be working with you. You'll need to sell your vision, I suppose, to actual potential customers. You need to get suppliers on board. There'll be people who want to collaborate with you. There'll be people that you'd like to very closely partner with, who might be directors of your company or your enterprise. There'll be people you want to hire. There'll be some of those people, hopefully will come from organizations or individuals with name recognition. And the exact nature of the team that you'll build is going to depend on your business model. But broadly, if you're selling products, you'll need people who can build products or supply products. If you're selling services, you need a different group of people who are going to help you supply those services. So a classic example of a management team that a startup company might comprise could be something like this. It could be a technical director, someone who is actually going to develop the invention. It could be a commercial director, someone who's actually going to sell the invention. It could be non-executive directors, people that provide contacts, advice, and credibility. And as your organization builds, you're almost certainly going to need someone in charge of the finances, the money, and possibly if you're actually a production organization, a supply organization, you're going to need someone in charge of operations. And the point I'd like to make here is you as the inventor, as the person getting the Enterprise Fellowship, can fill any or none of these roles. You might be chief executive, but on the other hand, you might not. And you need to think about very carefully about what role best suits you as you build the team. And in addition to that, you need to start thinking about the people that you'd like to join. There might be some specific individuals, or there might be some people that you think, I really need someone with this kind of background. I don't know who they are yet. I haven't met them, but you should be starting to think about the CV of the people you'd like to have on your team. Now, when you talk to people in personnel, recruiters and such like, they will divide someone's skills and expertise into two different areas. The skills and expertise, the qualifications, the experience, the number of years in business, the record of success. The jargon people talk about there is hard skills, fairly easily measured, easily quantified. Underneath that, people like to talk about personal qualities, the drive, the motivation, the persuasion, the team working, and the leadership. And recruiters will typically call those soft skills. And I think it's true to say that most recruiters would say hard skills get you the interview, but soft skills get you the job. And usually it's easier to find people with the right hard skills than the right soft skills. And that's partly because the latter can be more difficult to catalog or quantify. Now, if you talk to entrepreneurs and ask them about what it takes to build an entrepreneurial team and have that be successful, these are some of the things they'll come up with. Entrepreneurs have to be determined. They have to have extremely good communication skills. They have to be good at problem solving. They have to be good with people and teamwork. And you notice that most of these are personal or soft skills, not hard skills. How can you find out what your own hard and soft skills are? Hard skills, that's okay, you can look at your CV. How can you find out about your soft skills? Well, there are a number of things that you can do to analyze your soft skills. There's something called the Myers-Briggs test. You might hear people talk about, oh, X is an INTJ or X is an ESTP. There's also a useful test called the Belbin test, developed by Meredith Belbin, a psychologist, I think back in the 1980s. The Belbin test, which I would encourage you to look up online, there's a Wikipedia article on it, gives you an idea of, in a team situation, what are the kind of things that you are most likely to enjoy and to be comfortable doing, okay? So some people, we call them plants, like to have the big ideas, the vision, let's do this. We have the shapers who say, I'm really anxious, I want to start. Look, the enemy are over there, charge. And then we have people like the completer finisher, the monitor evaluator, who are more thoughtful and say, I'm not sure if charging that direction is the best idea. How about left a bit? Or look, everyone, we're going to be putting in this tender. Look, it's got to be in at 4 o'clock on Friday, not at 5 o'clock, and it's got to be in 4 copies, and one of the copies has to be in green ink, detail person. It's really important that you know where you are on that spectrum, because you're likely to perform best in the role that you most enjoy. It's also really important to recognize that you need all of these skills to build a successful team. So as well as knowing what you are, it's really important to know what you're not. Okay? I, for example, really do not enjoy being a completer finisher. Filling out forms is almost actively painful for me. I have people that have said I have dysphormia in the same way that some people have dyslexia. So what do? Well, I actively look to work for someone with those complementary skills. Tony, would you like to tell us what your main skill is on the Belbin test?
Yes, I'm a completer finisher and I'm also a team worker. and a worker. So actually I compliment Kevin pretty well, because Kevin's the ideas person and the guy who keeps coming up with the ideas for what we do next in the way of projects. So we know what our strengths are and we know how we like to work, and it works pretty well for us. There are times though when you have to stop and think, why am I not seeing this issue the same way as Kevin? And it is because he's coming at it from a different angle. So you do need to recognize that by having a diverse team, you also bring in some interesting dynamics to the team.
There is a potential for people like us to squabble or quarrel because we do come at things from different ways. Having done the Belbin test, having worked together, we know that we are truly complementary, and that the two of us together are much more powerful than individuals. If you want an example of this kind of interaction in popular culture, watch some of the earlier series of The Apprentice. You'll see how Alan Sugar and Nick Hewer operate together. But there you have a classic combination of the entrepreneur, that's Alan Sugar, who's the shaper, and Nick, who is very much the detail person, the completer person, and the analytical person. One of the things we get asked about quite often is it a good idea to employ or work with family or friends? And the answer is, it can be. It can be because you basically should trust those people. You should know them pretty well, and you should know their strengths and weaknesses. On the other hand, it can be disastrous, because one of the things you have to do is separate the personal relationship from the business relationship. What happens to your personal relationship if you decide that actually it's not a good idea to work together and one of you has to leave? What happens if one of you gets promoted and one of you doesn't? I think it's fair to say that in 25 years of management consulting, some of the biggest conflicts that I have ever seen have been in family businesses where this kind of conflict happens. Just because they're family and friends doesn't mean that you cannot be businesslike. In fact, it's even more important to be businesslike with family and friends. You must have the right shareholders agreement. You must have the right contracts. You must have a clear description of what everyone's doing. You must decide in advance what would cause termination and what would happen at termination. For example, what happens to their shares. The other thing you absolutely must do, and that's probably true of any team, but it's particularly true if you're working with family and friends, is everyone has to make a will, right? Everyone has to make a will. What happens if your business partner, it becomes unwell, is sick, or tragically dies when they still own part of your company? And I know this in a number of family businesses from slightly bitter experience, that this can be a very, very difficult situation. Now, one of the things that we do like to do these days is to build diverse teams, cross-cultural teams. It's no longer good enough to have a group of white people who all came from the same school. Investors are going to look at that and say, does your management team really reflect your customer profile, for example? Having said that, building teams across cultures, different countries, different ethnicities, different beliefs can be tricky. What you'll find is that there are cultural issues in business as well as social issues. There was a Dutch writer back in the 1980s who covered this with a paper called Do American Management Theories Apply in the Rest of the World, which is a wonderful title because you can pretty well tell the answer of the question from the way the question is phrased. And the answer is basically no, they don't. And he discusses things like the power distance relationship, individual decision-making versus collective decision-making, the avoidance or welcome of uncertainty, long-termism and short-termism. If you want a very clear example of how important this can be, you might read the Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers. He talks about something called the power distance relationship. And the power distance relationship is all about how close the relationship is between a boss and a subordinate. Are they very, very formal with each other? Are they informal with each other? He quotes the example of a very formal business culture in Korea and a very informal business culture in New Zealand, and how that actually leads to very, very noticeable differences in the safety records of the Korean Airways and Air New Zealand. Having said all that, what is interesting is that even underneath those cross-cultural issues, for example, a Japanese person will tend to be slightly more formal and polite than many British people. You will still find that the Belbin test works. You will still find Japanese shapers who might be a bit more polite than a British one. You will still find American monitor evaluators, right? So those things still apply. They'll just have a different, if you like, coating on them. Other useful concepts when you're thinking about your team. One concept is a man called Tuchman, and some of you may have heard this. It's called forming, storming, norming, and performing. Basically what Tuchman said, by observing a number of teams, is teams don't just spring into existence, they tend to evolve. And one of the things that he noticed is that the best teams typically go through a forming and storming process. So expect to have challenges and arguments as you build the team before it actually settles down, right? Get used to that. The other useful concept is Maslow. Abraham Maslow analyzed the benefits that people get from work. Maslow created and popularized the concept of the hierarchy of needs, where physical needs like shelter and warmth and food are at the bottom of the pyramid, and above that you get psychological needs. The need for money is in the middle, but for most people it's not at the top. And what that means is that money will not be the only or the main motivator for most people beyond a certain point. And one of the challenges for the entrepreneur as they build their team and build their business is to figure out what people's motivators are and what you can do to make those people give their best. Now, while we're talking about money, it's useful to understand this. You'll be writing a business plan should you get the Enterprise Fellowship. And in that business plan, you'll need to think about the process of recruiting people into your team. You'll need to think about how long it takes and build that into your timeline. And how long might it take? On the slide here, you can see a number of things that need to be done. You need to identify the need. You possibly need to write a job description. You need to put the advert in relevant journals or places where they can see it, newspapers. You might need to choose and see first interviewees. You then will select a short list and give them a more longer interview process. You choose the person, then it's a question of negotiating terms and conditions and contracts. How long does that all take? Well, we've already taken, what, 3-4 months? And then, of course, the issue is if they're really good people that you really want to hire, they may be already employed. So what's their notice period? In other words, you can't just say, I will recruit a salesperson and they'll be up and working 2 weeks into the project. And of course, then the question is, what does it cost? And what it costs is this. At the low end, if you're lucky, it will cost you about 15% of the new person's starting salary. Just in your time, the administration that goes into doing this internally. At the high end, it can take 50% or more. And the high end covers using people like executive search recruiters, headhunters. It also includes what you might need to buy people out of their present job, right? So again, that's got to be built into your budgets and it's got to be realistic. So at this point, having covered a number of things for you to think about, I'm going to turn over to Tony and ask Tony to specifically talk about what investors think about people. And the reason I'm doing this is that Tony is a person who has both read people's grant applications and sometimes turned them down, and has read people's business plans. So he's been involved in both public and private sector innovation funding. Tony, over to you.
Thanks very much, Kevin. So I just wanted to introduce you to some thoughts about teams and their importance to business angels. I'm going to talk about business angels in this presentation because they could be important to you as you come to the end of your fellowship, because these informal business investors are the kinds of people you'll be pitching your business plan to. So these kinds of investors have got a lot of business experience and hopefully they've got quite a lot of money. They'll have been around the block in business and they'll know quite a lot about the kinds of investment that you're looking for. The first thing to say is that only one investment in 10 is going to pay off. Probably 4 out of 10 are going to limp along and probably 5 out of 10 are going to fail. So we're going to have some failures, some that limp along, and one will make some attractive returns, and that will pay for the rest of the portfolio. The question is, why is that important? You'll see what the issues are that investors want to talk about. The important thing to notice is that technology and intellectual property is only the third issue that they want to talk about. Most importantly, they usually want to talk about the management team and about the management team. Now, the reason that's important is because an investor is going to be with this business probably for at least 5 years. So what matters to the investor is, can they work with this group of people and is there a fit? It really is like a dating agency in some ways. You're looking for management teams you can work with over the long term. Because the investor is investing money, the next consideration is the finance. They want to be sure that the money that they're putting in is going to be well looked after and is going to generate a return. So technology and intellectual property, that is what is the project all about, is only a minor consideration. One of the reasons for this is very often once an investment has been made, the business model changes. Once the business starts, they find that the market isn't quite where they thought it was. And to use a modern parlance, the business pivots. That is, they throw away the business plan and go, right, that didn't work. What can we do with this investment and this know-how, and how are we going to make a return? Another reason the management team is important is because, as I mentioned, so many of the investments don't work as was planned. And this puts a real strain on the management team. So investors are always going to look at the management team from the point of view of how are they going to deal with pressure, or when they don't meet the sales targets, or when they don't meet the technical targets. Are they going to fall to pieces, or are they going to struggle through and get out the other end? So it's quite important to get a view from the investor's point of view. What they're looking at is the team strong and do they understand money? The technology and the business that you're pitching is a secondary consideration. So very often when you approach people for money, they're not going to ask you about your technology up front. What they're going to do is ask to meet with you so they can have a look at the whites of your eyes and see what kind of people you are. I'm going to touch on this briefly because in a later presentation, the one on funding, we're going to talk more about your presentation to the RSE, but I do want you to make sure that you do mention yourself and your future team in your slides. We're suggesting that in slide 6 or 7 in our proposed presentation outline, you talk about yourself and the future team. As Kevin said, it's not necessary that you know who's going to be in the team, but be able to describe what kind of people you're looking for to take the business forward. So do make sure you talk about the team in your presentation and do look in the funding presentation that we're putting together for you, because that's where we deal in more detail with how to make the presentation to the RSE. Thanks very much. I'm just going to recap on where we've been. We've been talking about hard and soft skills and your personal ambition. So why are you getting involved in the RSE Fellowship? We've spoken in quite some depth about building diverse and motivated teams. And I think we've probably suggested you don't want to look for too many people who are too like yourself. If anything, building successful teams is about having a diverse range of people and skills so that the team can form and cover all of the important bases. As we've mentioned, this is one of 4 videos that we've produced. The other ones are on innovation, markets and technology, intellectual property, and funding and raising money. And I will mention again that the final presentation, funding and raising money, does include our advice on presenting to the RSE. We feel this is quite important because we know from the evaluators at the RSE that it has been the presentations historically that have let down applications. That is, they've known that they've seen good projects, but they really haven't put across the reason that the RSE should be investing in them across to the panel as strongly as they could. So please do look at that one because it gives some important pointers, we feel, on how to be successful in pitching to the RSE. If you want further information, you should take those questions directly to the RSE, who'll be able to answer your questions. Thanks very much for your attention.